So Thor Ragnarok has now been released worldwide, that means including the US, finally for you guys. And it's quite interesting because Thor Ragnarok has been quite a different film to what we may have expected a few years ago, and that's what I'm here to discuss today, is what Thor Ragnarok could have actually been originally before it almost got retconned entirely into an entirely different film. So what could have Thor Ragnarok originally looked like? Well, let's take a look. First off, we probably would have got something a lot more in line with what the first two Thor movies set up, in the sense we were going to get a lot more of a somewhat medieval, original story that the first Thor movies presented us with. It would have been a lot more of a follow-on from Thor the Dark World. However, I'm really glad that they didn't go this direction, because obviously Thor Ragnarok is a brilliant film, whereas Thor was perhaps on a slippery slope going downhill after the second movie, so we definitely would have got something a lot more in line with those, I think. Also, I think we would have got a lot more of a close adaptation to the Ragnarok story from the comics. Now, films in the MCU are not afraid to taking comic book names but then changing the story. Like Civil War was a lot more of a double down version of the comic version. Also, it looks like Infinity War isn't exactly going to be Infinity War, but I think we would have got something a lot more along the lines of Ragnarok, where it was a very much more of a darker reflection of Ragnarok, where we would have got the actual introduction of Hel, and we would have got a lot more definite version of Surtur. I think it's also positive to say we may have got the return of some of those Earth Thor characters. Maybe not necessarily Jane Foster, but we would have got maybe Kat Dennings' character return, and also, like, you know, Dr. Selvig. People like that who kind of made up the original Thor cast. We probably would have seen them return. However, I'm actually quite glad we didn't, because I really didn't like those characters and never did. So I'm glad we didn't, but I reckon that's definitely what would have happened if Thor Ragnarok would have stuck to its original plan. Also, I think it's safe to say we would have got a full conclusion of the Loki is Odin storyline. Obviously, we did get, I guess you could say, a conclusion in Ragnarok, but they played it off as a joke, whereas I think if Ragnarok would have stuck to what its original plan was going to be, I think Loki would have been involved in the story as a villain a lot more, perhaps working with Surtur, and therefore it would have been a lot more of a conflict between Thor and Loki than actually played off as a joke like it was in the actual movie we got. So it would have been a lot more of an intense storyline. Also, I would say that the Hulk wouldn't have been in the film whatsoever. The Hulk would have been completely gone. We wouldn't have got anything regarding Planet Hulk. It wouldn't have been anything like that. Or maybe it would have been, who knows, but I still don't think Thor would have been meeting up with the Hulk in this film, just because, again, if they were going to go for that darker tone, I think that Hulk being in it would completely conflict against that tone. So I think Hulk would have been perhaps completely eliminated, or maybe it would have been just a passing thing. I don't really know on this one. And finally, I think we would have got a lot more of a bigger connection to the wider MCU. I think Thanos perhaps would have got a bigger name drop here. Also, I think that one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the MCU is the Infinity Stones. I reckon they would have got a lot more of a thing here. Maybe the Soul Stone would have been revealed. I think a lot of people were expecting the Soul Stone here. I personally have always believed it will show up in Black Panther. But I think a lot of people were expecting it here, and maybe it would have showed up here if it was originally going to show up. So definitely that would have had a bigger part to play. So how do you think Thor Ragnarok was originally going to play out? I think Thor Ragnarok is a really interesting film, considering how it did turn out to be a full-fledged comedy, whereas originally I think it would have been a lot more of a in-line film with what the first two movies set up, because Thor Ragnarok is such a tangent in comparison to the first two films. So I think it would be really interesting to see what film we would have actually got, and I would like to see maybe Kevin Feige come out and say what the original plans were, because it's definitely an interesting story to have a look at.